welcome to another groundbreaking episode of Let's Talk AI. Trust, innovation, people. Powered, as always, by EY.ai right here on businesstech.coza. I'm your host, Michael Avery, and today we're prompting deeper into the dynamic world of generative AI, where creativity meets efficiency, and certainly what everyone is talking about at the moment, with the help of today's guest, Paul St Quintin, UI Africa Digital Engineering and Managed Services Leader. We're about to unravel the secrets behind successful enterprise adoption of this phenomenal tech. And that's really the key here, is enterprise level adoption. Paul, great to have you on the show. Hope you're keeping well.
Michael, thank you so much for having me. Really looking forward to the conversation. And yeah, it's always a topic that I'm highly passionate about. And it's evolving so quickly on a daily basis. So I really enjoy catching up.
Yeah, I mean, the speed of that evolution is just phenomenal. There's not a day that goes by that I don't see some new application for using generative AI in a very interesting and novel way. So when it comes to enterprise adoption of generative AI, let's maybe just unpack why companies should be thinking about enterprise-wide adoption of this technology as opposed to more discrete deployments as and where needed.
No, it's a really good starting point. And I think, Michael, what we have to acknowledge nowadays is that people are using generative AI. Everyone's talking about ChatGPT and everyone is starting to play with it, right? They're starting to see what it can do, what it can't do, how it can add to what I do, for example. And I think why it's absolutely critical for corporates to think about let's adopt it at an enterprise level is because whether you like it or not, people are using it, right? Now, if you have people using it in a way that doesn't align to what you're trying to do as a business, it could also create a bit of risk, because, for example, I might be uploading client information into a public cloud. I might be putting trade secrets out there that we might not necessarily want us to do. With that being said, however, let's turn it on to the positive. So what it does do is it gives us a real opportunity to fundamentally rethink what we do. And what I mean by that is from an innovation perspective, I can now do things differently. I can do things faster. Quick story was I was coming up with a content around a discussion the other day about saying, how do we create an experience center and what should this thing look like? And we were putting a couple of ideas on the table, and we asked one of the generative AI engines to put an idea together. And within seconds, we had this phenomenal start of something we could build up. And I think that's the true value of it, right? So from an enterprise perspective, we need to think about how do we get our business to start adopting generative AI and start using some of these tools, but within the framework that it adds value to our enterprise without exposing us to additional risk. So, the key thing then is to say, well, if we go on a journey, let's say to everyone, we're on this journey. We've got this place to come and try it, come play with it, come see what it does, come think about how it adds value to you or to the business as a whole. And then, as a team, people can start building on that. You might come up with an idea, I might like that, I might build on it, etc. So you then have this enterprise adoption as opposed to discrete what's happening behind one door as opposed to another door. And I suppose that's where the risk comes in. That's also where the opportunity.
Well, I often think, and I was having this conversation on my radio show the other day, that in order to catalyze innovation, and we're speaking about R&D, and a journalist knows R&D is the rejected and dejected room where your failed manuscripts and stories go. But really, R&D is so critical to reinvigorating growth in the South African economy, and we're just not doing enough of it inside corporate South Africa. And I think much of it potentially could also be placed on the past mistakes that we've made. There's been this kind of shiny object syndrome where the latest new shiny tech has been sold as the thing that's going to change your business forever. And generally technology just doesn't work that way. So how do you guard against that tendency to adopt new technology when we're speaking about AI just for the sake of innovation without really having a clear strategic purpose?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think let's make it slightly wider. I'm going to classify all of that under digital, right? We've worked with a lot of our customers who've gone and said, robotics, let's try it. It's the latest thing in the market. Let's give it a go. Now, that's a very important process in getting it right. And if you don't get it right, you can get it horribly wrong. And then what also happens is that people think, it didn't deliver what it was promised to. Should we actually stop it? journey holistically. Now, I think the trick here is knowing what it can do and knowing what it can't do, and then building on what it can do. I always like to use the term of the Mario Brothers. I'm sure you played Mario Brothers as a child, and so did I. We always had Mario, and he would go and he'd eat the mushroom, and then he'd get bigger. The mushroom and Mario are both powerful together, but when they combine, they become this exponential being. And I think generative AI is very much like that. So how do you take your generative AI capability and instead of saying, let's go build it as a standalone offering or capability within the business, rather think about saying, let's see what we've already done. A number of our customers have already gone on a digital journey by adopting automation, workflow, all these new technologies, and they've started to really add value because they know what they do and what they don't do. Now, bringing in generative AI simply adds to the capabilities that it has on offer, right? So I think, again, instead of it being shiny, it's about saying, how do we take what we've done? How do we add it to our toolbox of capabilities? And how do we offer even more to our businesses or to our customers or to our suppliers or to that whole ecosystem in which we work in?
I like that Mario Brothers idea. And a lot of the game for me was about building blocks. It was about building up from level to level as you went. So when we think about the enterprise adoption of generative AI, what would you say are the core building blocks that should be considered if we're going to implement this at a strategic level?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a very good question, right? And I think that ties into what this conversation is really about at its core. So a lot of our customers, like I mentioned, have been on this maturity curve already or have started their journey. So they have a level of digital capabilities in place. So it might vary from industry to industry, but what we believe is core to every journey is number one, is having a defined strategy of what you're trying to do, right? From a digital or an automation or a generative AI capability, it's about having a clear strategy in terms of saying, what do we want to do from a quantitative as well as a qualitative perspective? And how does the strategy of the generative AI offering tie into our business strategy? At the end of the day, we need to say this capability exists to add value to the wider firm in any what way it might be. Once you've got your strategy defined, what we would then recommend is saying, okay, what are the core processes that you need to have in place to be able to deliver on your strategy? How do you go about identifying the right use cases? But not just from the core use cases, but rather from saying, what are we trying to solve for, right? Mm-hmm. Once we know what we're trying to solve for, what are the tools that we need to be able to do it? And then how do we deliver that? And often we go through these rotations of developing an MVP, and some of them initially don't deliver on the use case or the metrics that we set in place. But after a very quick while, they actually do. And I think it's a core message then is once it's in, is revisiting it and saying, what is it doing? Is it delivering against what we set out to do? And if not, how do we tweak it? If it is, that's great. What are the lessons that we could take from that and to deploy into our other initiatives that we're looking at doing? So that's from a process perspective. And then probably the most important one is around the people. So you've got these processes that you need to deliver on, and they need types of people in that team to be able to achieve those processes. And people always think generative AI happens behind closed doors with data scientists and data engineers. It's blown up much wider. I think, like we were talking about at the beginning of this interview, everyone is starting to use it. And everyone's thinking and saying, does this provide me a different career opportunity? Should I be thinking about my career differently? And then you've got this almost array of different skills and people in this team that range from UX designers, developers, business analysts, scientists, etc. And that's where all the fun happens. But we've got to remember we operate within the confines of a business, right? So we also need to think about how do we bring in the tech representatives? How do we bring in the risk representatives, the finance representatives? And what's really powerful about that is also saying, when they're looking at what they're doing in their area, saying, well, maybe I should be thinking about this differently and using some of these technologies or capabilities to help me do more or become more efficient or become better or new revenue streams or whatever it might be. So that's the third component. The fourth component is then the governance. Is having a clear set out governance framework that, tied into a strategy says, well, this is what we need to achieve from a qualitative perspective, from a quantitative perspective, and then revisiting how successful have we been against that, right? And also, some of the clients that we're starting to see where they're using the governance framework very effectively is they're saying, okay, in these initiatives, we're quite happy for anyone in the business to go try solve it using this technology stack. And we'll define what you can and can't do within a framework. But then you've got on the other side, you've got this delivery team that has got these core experts that can go and have that deep experience that can do the more complex stuff. But what's great about that is you have the deep skills, but then you also have people in the business who are the normal you and me going and saying, well, let's try this, let's test this. And they're all part of the ecosystem. And then just lastly, sorry to interrupt, just lastly would be the technology part. And that's just saying, building on your point earlier about the shiny things in the business. I think it's also very important to be fluid around that. So today we designed for this. And as new capabilities come into play, we then unplug certain ones, we plug new ones in, but the core framework doesn't change.
Because you're dealing with, as we said, integrating this with other really interesting technologies, AI with automation, with imagery, with data analytics. And through the lens of the different departments, you're going to start seeing new use cases emerge that potentially you hadn't even thought of. That's why I love the idea that you just described of creating almost a safe space for employees to go and play in this kind of sandbox of innovation to see what comes out and how you can develop that. But obviously, with the right governance and accountability, I guess, that's adequately distributed across different roles and departments is critical here to ensure you can do that while minimizing potential risks. What happens if there's a shortage of necessary skills? Because as you said, there's a range of expertise, designers, engineers, scientists, developers, UX, all of it. What happens if you've got a shortage of the necessary skills? Do you bring them in? Do you grow your own timber? Do you partner? Because this tech is moving so quickly that most businesses want to start integrating kind of tomorrow.
Yeah, and that's such a good point. Again, I think the core thing here is about having that ecosystem, because it's not just about growing internal or working with with partners, etc. It's all of the above. What we're also starting to see is because of the technology and the capabilities across those technologies, it's very difficult for someone to have such a thin understanding across all of them. What we're starting to see is people dive into core capabilities, core technologies, core offerings. And I think the beauty then is about saying, how do we choose and select the right team for the problem we're trying to solve? So today you might actually have people from finance or risk in the team, and tomorrow you might have someone from customer service or customer sales in the team. And collectively they're delivering on what you've mandated them to do. But I think the one thing we're very proud about from a South African perspective is we've got phenomenal skills locally. People always used to say, how do we go to the US or how do we go to Europe to get these skills, etc. Our biggest challenge locally is Europe coming to us and poaching our skills. And our responsibility as South Africans is to say, how do we then go and start developing more and more and more of this incredible asset that we have within the borders of our country?
So it's not just rugby that we're leading the world and seeing our rugby players poached. It's in our AI and data analytics skills, which is fantastic. It really is, one of those stories that I don't think we talk enough of in South Africa. Sometimes I think we can be a little bit too negative. For the executive viewer, so what are the key things, what are the key considerations that you would recommend when embarking on this transformative journey?
So, Michael, the one thing I always laugh about that question is that people always expect a technical or technology-based answer. The reality of the situation is that the best way to take this forward is to have a human-based conversation, right? I have seen lots of these projects succeed and fail based on how well change management is managed. The reality of the situation is that we'll have a narrative happening within the business on what is happening behind closed doors or what we're doing from a generative AI perspective. And the challenge then is to say, how do we as a delivery team manage that narrative, right? So team, we're on this journey. The reason we're on this journey is because we want to add efficiency, we want to add value to what you do, We want to add different revenue streams that might be, and we want you to be involved. The moment people feel threatened by this, they're not going to come up with those ideas. If you threaten my job,
Yeah.
I'm not going to give you best in practice or where I see the challenges in my role. So again, it's about proactive change management. It's about being very transparent. Literally, have your team delivering these pieces of work in an open area. Have an experience center where people can come and play and test and see what these capabilities do and how they operate. So that's the first real thing that I think we need to really get right. And the second thing is start small and scale fast. You don't need to have the perfect plan or the perfect strategy before you get going. What we start to see is some of these great ideas start in pods. These pods then turn into projects. These projects then become enterprise-wide deployments. But it was never meant to be that way. It wasn't designed that way from the start. It evolved very quickly based on the people that were there, the knowledge that they had of the business, and how they took those opportunities forward.
And I like that approach because you don't have to go and break the bank initially on that either.
Absolutely. And I think probably the most important one is have an executive sponsor. That executive sponsor needs to be able to support the program through thick and thin. And they need to have the necessary mandates and the targets to be able to achieve what they need to achieve. I don't know about you, but I have two young sons, and I remember the first couple of weeks of them being born, I turned around to my wife and I said, what have we done? We had such a great life and things are chaotic. And now we absolutely love it because, you didn't have a choice. You had to stick it out, but you've got to adapt. And the rest of the business has to do that too. So it's about being patient and being resilient and being committed to the cause.
Yeah, I've got two young daughters who are, well, a little bit older now, 6 and 9, but we were in exactly the same boat, questioning what we had gotten ourselves into. And because we stuck it out, it's so rewarding. Given that, and if you want an executive sponsor, executives obviously going to look at you and say, Michael, if I'm going to implement this in my organization, I need to be able to measure it. We've got to be able to measure the impact that we're delivering here. So how do we do that accurately? How do we differentiate between meaningful impact, meaningful ROI, and something that's maybe slightly more superficial?
Yeah, so remember initially we spoke about having a strategy and around having generative AI capabilities and being clear about the quantitative and qualitative targets. I think what we also need to think about is how do we revisit those targets on an ongoing basis? Because you're also thinking about what's happening in business and how you're adapting to that. But I think from a quantitative perspective, it's a lot easier to measure these kinds of things. But the number of teams trained up, the number of deployments that we're looking at, the amount of people certified to be able to roll out these programs, the amount of projects that we've done, the amount of additional revenue streams that we're building on or considering. And all of those are worlds apart, but they evolve very quickly. I
Yeah.
suppose, I suppose the qualitative one's a little bit more difficult to mention. And what that results with is, how are people engaging with the capability? How are they talking about it within the corridors of the business? What is the energy levels of it? Or do we have people thinking about how do I digitize first to deliver better value? Those are the kinds of metrics that we start thinking about, and they're a little bit harder to measure. But I think
Yeah.
the R&D, you mentioned a good point, the research and development part. We are making an investment into something. And the best way to do it is go in these small increments and then scale it as needed. But it does take investment to start. You have to invest in having the right people. If you've got existing people within the business, you have to invest in giving them time to do this. You have to give them the mind space. And also some of the things that we're starting to see is not bringing them into your current operations. Do not mix business as usual with business of tomorrow. Allow them to focus on business of tomorrow. And all of those three become that balancing act that executives have to deal with on a continuous basis.
Well, there you have it, folks. Great discussion on the path to successful enterprise adoption of generative AI with Paul St Quintin, a true visionary in the field, as you've just heard. Remember, it's not just about the tech, but it's so much about the people. It's about the hearts and the minds and getting that right to drive its integration. Paul, thanks so much for sharing those great insights with us today. Take care.
Cheers, Michael. Thank you.